crade. It has often been my habit, as I have before confessed, Caesar, to record some of the singular adventures of my friend, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, consulting detective of Baker Street. Rate. Many of these incidents I have already laid before the public, and yet the supply seems inexhaustible. For scarcely a month passes in which Holmes does not find himself summoned to some new case of singular peculiarity. At the time of which I now write, London was awakening from the cold grip of winter, and the early buds of spring lent the air a fresh vivacity. Our rooms in Baker Street, though humble, were as ever filled with the atmosphere of pipe smoke, clippings of newspapers, and the restless energies of my companion. It was a morning like many others, with the first light breaking through the curtains, and Holmes stretched languidly in his armchair, his piercing gaze already fixed on some fresh puzzle. For my own part, I had been busying myself with my medical journals, though I must admit my eyes wandered as often to Holmes's keen profile as to the printed page. For in every fibre of his being he exuded the restless intellect which made even the most trivial observation a matter of consequence. Holmes, it astonishes me still, I remarked, laying aside my book, how you can spend hours upon end in that chair, seemingly idle, and yet later reveal that every instant has been applied to deduction.
Idle, my dear Watson, no, no. A man might appear at rest, but within his faculties may be in as active a play as the wheels of a well-oiled mechanism. You see me seated here, yet I have traversed half of England in my mind since breakfast.
Then I should count myself fortunate, if you will, for my own instruction. Share with me some fragment of these mental journeys.
Elementary, Watson. Observe! Holmes leaned forward, his eyes shining with sudden energy. The gentleman who passed our window a quarter hour ago, tall, with the gait of a soldier. You remarked him not, and yet I may tell you he has lately returned from Afghanistan, is much troubled by his finances, and bears the weight of a domestic quarrel upon his conscience.
Upon my word, Holmes, I cried, half in protest, half in admiration. You cannot expect me to accept such sweeping conclusions without some explanation.
On the contrary, I expect you always to demand explanation, for therein lies the training of the mind. The upright carriage, the shortened step, and the tan line about his eyes bespoke the soldier returned from the east. His boots, though of fine leather, were much cracked and ill-blacked, suggesting diminished means. Finally, the ink smudge upon his cuff was no ordinary accident. It bore the clear mark of hurried correspondence, most likely letters of reconciliation or recrimination. It is all quite elementary, my dear fellow.
I could not but smile at his complacency, though my admiration for his craft never waned. Such was the very air of Baker Street, a mixture of the ordinary and the extraordinary, the commonplace transmuted into gold by Holmes's peculiar genius. It was upon this morning, while Holmes still discoursed upon the habits of returning soldiers, that Mrs. Hudson entered with a card upon a tray.
"A young lady has called, gentlemen," said our landlady, a voice tinged with that deference she always reserved for Holmes's visitors. "She begs an audience if you can spare the time."
Show her in at once, Mrs. Hudson, said Holmes briskly. Watson, here is a chance for you to apply that good, honest medical eye of yours. We shall see what manner of visitor London bestows upon us this morning.
With that, the door opened, and there entered a young lady of striking appearance, though her attire bore signs of modest means. Her figure was tall and graceful, her hair of a rich chestnut hue, and her expression one of mingled anxiety and determination. She carried herself with the dignity of one who has resolved upon a difficult course, though her eyes betrayed a certain apprehension.
"Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she began, her voice low but steady, "I thank you for receiving me. My name is Violet Hunter, and I am by profession a governess."
Pray be seated, Miss Hunter, Holmes replied, motioning her toward the chair opposite him. You will oblige us by stating the facts which bring you here.
As she seated herself, I could not help but note the pallor of her cheeks, the slight tremor of her hands, and the eager glance she directed at Holmes, as though upon his wisdom rested her entire future.
"It may seem to you, gentlemen, a trifling matter," she said, clasping her gloved hands together. but to me it is of the deepest consequence. I have been offered a position, an exceedingly generous one, far above the usual terms for a governess, and yet the conditions attached to it are so unusual, so disquieting, that I know not whether I dare accept without your counsel.
Indeed, Holmes murmured, his eyes narrowing with interest. An unusual offer, generous remuneration, but conditions that awaken suspicion. Yes, Watson, you perceive the outline of a problem here already. Pray continue, Miss Hunter, and omit no detail, however trivial it may appear to you.
Thus encouraged, the young lady began to relate her circumstances, her words pouring forth in a mixture of relief and nervous urgency.
I have for some years supported myself as a governess, though the wages have seldom sufficed for more than the barest necessities. Recently, through an agency, I was introduced to a gentleman of singular appearance and manner, one Mr. Geoffrey Rucastle, who resides in the country at a place called the Copper Beeches, near Winchester. Mr. Rucastle offered me a salary of £100 a year, double my present earnings, with the charge of his young child. The sum dazzled me, and yet the conditions he attached were so extraordinary that I confess I hesitated.
Extraordinary conditions, I repeated. In what way?
Mr. Rucastle, while most affable, insisted upon certain requirements that I should, for instance, wear a particular dress of blue silk whenever requested, cut my hair short at his wife's desire, and sit each evening in the drawing-room window in such a manner that I might be seen from the road. When I protested at the strangeness of these demands, he laughed and assured me it was but a harmless whim, yet his manner left me uneasy. He urged me, moreover, to decide at once and hinted that refusal would be most unwise.
As she spoke, Holmes leaned back, steepling his fingers and closing his eyes, the very image of concentrated thought.
Most singular indeed. You are wise to hesitate, Miss Hunter. When an employer offers double wages for a simple post, one must suspect that the duties are far from ordinary. Tell me, what impression did you form of this Mr. Rucastle himself?
He is a stout man, ruddy of face, with a hearty manner that struck me as somewhat forced, was though beneath his joviality lay another nature. His wife, pale and silent, seemed oppressed, and scarcely raised her eyes throughout the interview. They have, too, a son, grown yet of a surly and disagreeable aspect, though he did not speak to me.
And yet, with all these misgivings, you are tempted by the salary?
Indeed, doctor, I am. A woman must live, and such an offer comes but rarely. Still, I could not shake the sense that to accept blindly might plunge me into peril. Thus I resolved to seek Mr. Holmes's advice before I gave my answer.
You did wisely, Miss Hunter, Holmes declared, opening his eyes and fixing her with a keen glance. There is, I suspect, more behind these copper beeches than meets the eye. We shall not pronounce judgment hastily. You will place before me every particular, the house, the family, the conditions, and then, if you consent, Watson and I shall accompany you to Hampshire. In such cases, the devil lurks in details, and we must first acquaint ourselves with every stone of the ground.
Miss Hunter's countenance brightened at his words, as though a great burden were lifted. I could see in Holmes's bearing that the matter, far from being trivial, had already engaged his full attention.
Then you will aid me, Mr. Holmes, she asked, her voice trembling with gratitude.
Most assuredly. You have placed your trust in me, and I shall not see you deceived or endangered if it can be prevented. Leave the acceptance of the post in abeyance for a day or two, and meanwhile I will make such inquiries as may be needful. Rest assured, Miss Hunter, that whatever sinister element lies behind these copper beeches, we shall bring it to light.
With these assurances, the young lady took her leave, a step lighter than when she came. For my own part, I watched Holmes with curiosity, for I knew the gleam in his eye too well. The game, as he was wont to say, was afoot. Holmes, I said, when the door had closed, do you truly think there is danger for the young lady?
Danger, Watson? Most assuredly. where money is lavishly offered and conditions are eccentric, one may be certain that some hidden motive underlies the mask. The dress, the haircut, the posture at the window, these are no whims but parts of a scheme. We must discover what lies at the root, lest Miss Hunter fall into a trap more subtle than she dreams.
As he spoke, Holmes's features were animated with that singular energy which always possessed him when confronted by a mystery. For my own part, I confess my imagination was already stirred by the prospect. The name itself, Copper Beeches, seemed to carry a note of foreboding, as though the very trees concealed some secret. Thus began an adventure, which was to test our vigilance and reveal, beneath the tranquil surface of an English country house, passions as dark as any in London's fog-bound alleys. A day or two elapsed after the visit of Miss Violet Hunter, during which Holmes was uncommonly restless. He paced our sitting room like a caged hound, alternately smoking pipe after pipe and scanning the morning papers with apparent indifference. Yet I, who knew him so well, could see that his whole mind was absorbed by the singular conditions of the Copper Beeches engagement. His manner, more than once, reminded me of those occasions when a criminal at large still eluded him, and he scented the chase but had not yet sighted his quarry. Holmes, I said one evening, as the firelight glowed upon the littered table, you appear consumed by impatience. Has there been any fresh word from Miss Hunter?
Indeed, there has, Holmes replied, springing to his feet and fetching a letter from the mantelpiece. She has accepted the post at Copper Beeches, as I bade her do. She leaves for Hampshire tomorrow, but she implores us to accompany her. The urgency of her request confirms what my reason had already indicated, that beneath the fair seeming exterior of Mr. Herier Geoffrey Rucastle lies something both sinister and dangerous.
You alarm me, Holmes, I said. Do you think her very safety is at stake?
My dear fellow, Holmes replied gravely, the safety of a lone young woman in a secluded country house, under the sway of a man of dubious character, must always be a matter of concern. Remember, Watson, crime does not confine itself to the dark alleys of London. It lurks as often beneath the red-tiled roofs of rustic homesteads. You will accompany me?
With pleasure, I exclaimed, my heart already stirred by the prospect of adventure. And thus it was, on a bright spring morning, Andy, that Holmes and I found ourselves upon the train to Winchester. The journey was a pleasant one, with the green fields rolling past, dotted with grazing sheep, and the hedgerows alive with the first notes of bird song. Holmes, however, paid little heed to the scenery. He sat opposite me, his eyes half closed, his long, thin fingers drumming upon his knee in rhythm with the clatter of the wheels. You are forming theories already, I ventured, breaking the silence.
Theories, Watson, no, mere surmises. We must not permit imagination to outrun the facts. One, yet certain elements are suggestive. Consider the insistence upon the young lady cutting her hair, the peculiar demand that she sit visible at the window, the lavish salary, each points to some deception, some masquerade. The lady is to serve not as herself, but as another. For whose benefit and for what purpose? That is the question.
You think then she is being made to impersonate someone?
Precisely. But whether the design is to lure, to deceive, or to conceal, we have yet to learn. The country air will perhaps give us clearer heads than London fog.
At Winchester we alighted, and there we were met by Miss Hunter herself. She looked paler than when we had seen her in Baker Street, though her countenance brightened at sight of Holmes.
Oh, Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, she cried, taking our hands with evident relief. I cannot tell you what it means to have your support. Already the situation grows more singular than I had imagined.
Compose yourself, Miss Hunter, said Holmes gently. Holmes, we are here now, and you have but to describe what has occurred since you entered upon your post.
I scarcely know where to begin. The house is large and lonely, surrounded by gloomy copper beeches which give it its name. Mr. Rucastle received me with the same forced heartiness, while his wife seemed more wan and spiritless than ever. But it is their demands, Mr. Holmes, They insisted immediately that I cut my hair, which I did most unwillingly. Then, each evening, they compelled me to wear that blue dress and to sit in the great front window for an hour, though I am forbidden to draw the blinds or stir from the chair. I feel like a doll set upon display for unseen eyes.
Holmes's face grew intent as he listened, his eyes gleaming with that inward fire which lit them when a problem seized him.
Yes, Watson, it is as I supposed. She is compelled to impersonate, but the object of this performance must yet be ascertained. Miss Hunter, have you observed anything of note during these enforced exhibitions?
Nothing certain, sir. Yet twice I fancied I saw a man standing among the trees at the far end of the drive, gazing toward the house. When I would have mentioned it, Mr. Rucastle laughed boisterously and bade me not let idle fancies trouble my mind.
And you are permitted free range of the house otherwise, I asked?
Oh, no, doctor. Many of the rooms are locked, and when once I stray toward a wing at the back, Mr. Rucastle's manner altered frightfully. He seized my arm, his eyes flashing with anger, and commanded me never to set foot there again. His cheerfulness returned the next instant, but the memory of his face in that moment chills me still.
Most interesting, murmured Holmes. And this locked wing, does any sound ever proceed from it? Knock.
Why, yes. At night, when all is quiet, I have heard faint footsteps and once a sob stifled as though from fear. I dared not speak of it, but I am certain I did not dream.
Holmes rose from the bench whereon we had seated ourselves near the station. His tall figure seemed to tower, his features sharp with decision.
Watson, the case declares itself more plainly with each word. There is a secret prisoner in that house whose likeness Miss Hunter is compelled to imitate. The sobs, the surveillance, the enforced impersonation, all point to it. The task before us is to unmask the Rucastle's design and to set at liberty whoever languishes behind those barred doors.
But Holmes, surely we cannot proceed without more certain evidence to intrude upon a man's house on suspicion alone.
My dear fellow, justice cannot always wait upon ceremony, yet we must be cautious. Tonight, Miss Hunter, you will observe closely any further sign of watchers outside the window. Watson and I shall lodge at a nearby inn, and tomorrow, with your guidance, we shall take a nearer view of this Copper Beeches. If our suspicions prove just, then, believe me, the law will find ample cause to enter.
Oh, thank heaven I sought your help, cried Miss Hunter, clasping her hands. I feel now that whatever evil lurks at the Copper Beeches, I shall not face it alone.
And so it was arranged. That evening, Holmes and I took rooms at a modest inn upon the outskirts of Winchester, while Miss Hunter returned to the great shadowed house among the beeches. I recall vividly the sight of her figure, slight yet resolute, as she passed down the lane, the copper-hued branches swaying overhead like watchful sentinels. Holmes sat long that night by the inn's window, his profile etched against the lamplight and calm, his gaze fixed upon the dark outline of the distant trees. He spoke little, but once he turned to me and said, "Oh,
There is a drama enacting itself behind those walls, Watson. Darker, perhaps, than even Miss Hunter dreams. Mark me, before this matter is resolved, we shall stand face to face with both cruelty and cunning of the most refined order."
His words struck a chill into my heart, though the April night was mild, for I knew too well that when Holmes spoke thus, he did not speak lightly. Somewhere within the Copper Beeches, a hidden soul cried out for deliverance, and we, by strange chance, had been summoned to answer. The following morning dawned grey and cool, with a thin mist rising from the fields about Winchester. Holmes, ever the early riser when a case pressed upon his mind, was already at the inn's window when I awoke, his gaze fixed steadily upon the distant line of Copper Beeches that loomed against the pale sky. "Abiel!" "You have not slept much, Holmes," I remarked, rising and drawing the curtains wider.
"Why, nor could I, Watson," he replied calmly. "A man does not lie easily abed when there is a human creature imprisoned yonder within those walls. Today we must go nearer, though with discretion. Our object is to obtain knowledge, not yet to act.
After breakfast, we set forth along the country road that led toward the Copper Beeches. It was a curious name, but the grove itself justified it amply, for the great trees grew in solemn ranks about the house, their foliage tinged with a ruddy bronze even in spring. The mansion rose behind them, large, solid, with high gables and long rows of windows, many of which were shuttered. A high stone wall enclosed the grounds, and the great iron gate, at which we presently paused, was flanked by lodges now falling into disrepair. A gloomy, forbidding place, I muttered, gazing up at the silent facade.
Yes, Watson, a prison wearing the mask of a country home. Observe how the shutters of that upper wing are secured from without. That is not to exclude the light, but to prevent escape.
As we stood thus, the gate creaked, and out came Miss Violet Hunter, who had contrived to meet us upon the road under pretext of an errand. She carried herself with a composure born of necessity, but her face was pale, and I noted the anxious way in which she glanced back at the house.
Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, she whispered, I cannot remain long, for Mr. Walking on. Rucastle is most jealous of my movements. But I begged leave to fetch some trifling things from the village, and so slipped out to meet you. I have fresh tidings.
Speak quickly then, Miss Hunter, said Holmes, his keen eyes softening with sympathy. Every detail is of value.
Last night, when I sat in the window as ordered, I again perceived a figure among the trees. This time I am certain it was a man, tall and gaunt, with features too far to distinguish. He raised his hands toward me in supplication, but before I could respond, Mr. Rucastle burst into the room, laughing loudly and clapping me upon the shoulder. He cried that I made a picture fit to grace any gallery, and insisted I hold my posture until the hour was done. Oh, Mr. Holmes, the whole business fills me with dread.
It is monstrous, I exclaimed. You are made a lure for some unhappy watcher outside.
Patience, Watson, said Holmes. We are close to the truth. Miss Hunter, you must endure a little longer, though I know the strain is severe. Tonight Watson and I shall conceal ourselves in the grove. If this mysterious watcher appears again, we shall have our answer.
I will do as you advise, sir, she said bravely. But there is more. Yesterday, by chance, I saw Mrs. Rucastle in tears, wringing her hands as though in despair. When she perceived me, she fled without a word, and later I heard Mr. Rucastle scolding her in harsh tones, though I could not catch the words.
A family drama of coercion and cruelty, Holmes murmured. Amos murmured. Watson, mark my words, this pale woman is no accomplice, but a sufferer herself. We must not judge her harshly.
At that moment, the very man of whom we spoke appeared. Mr. Rinkra, Mr. Loeb, Dr. Rucastle himself came striding down the drive toward the gate. Go! He was a stout man, florid of countenance, with a jovial air that sat uneasily upon him, as though he wore it like a mask ill-fitted to the features beneath.
Ah, Miss Hunter, he cried, his voice hearty. Off to the village, are you? And friends to bid you farewell on your walk. Well, well, introductions then, Mr.
Holmes, my companion said smoothly, bowing. Sherlock Holmes, at your service, and my friend, Dr. Watson. We are in the district for a few days, and had the good fortune to encounter Miss Hunter, whom we knew in London.
Indeed. Delighted, gentlemen, delighted, boomed Rucastle, his ruddy face creasing into a grin. London acquaintances, eh? Well, Miss Hunter is proving herself a pearl among governesses, I assure you. Come, come, you must join us for refreshment. Copper Beeches is no hermitage, though we are a quiet household. Pray, walk in.
He flung the gate wide with a flourish and ushered us up the drive with an insistence that brooked or refusal. Holmes, to my surprise, acquiesced readily, though I saw in the quick gleam of his eye that he welcomed the chance to inspect the house at close quarters. The entrance hall was lofty and sombre, lined with dark panelling, and hung here and there with portraits whose subjects scowled gloomily from their frames. Rucastle led us into a great drawing room, furnished richly, but with a heaviness that oppressed the spirits. Mrs. Rucastle was there, a pale, delicate woman with downcast eyes who rose nervously at our approach. She greeted us with courtesy, but her manner was so timid that I pitied her at once.
My dear, these are friends of Miss Hunter's, Rucastle announced, rubbing his hands together. Mr. Holmes and Dr. Watson from London. They will take a glass of wine with us before continuing their ramble.
You are welcome, gentlemen, she murmured, barely lifting her eyes.
You have a charming home, madam, Holmes observed politely, his gaze, meanwhile, sweeping the room with that rapid, comprehensive glance of his which missed no detail.
I saw his eyes linger upon the long French window which gave upon the front lawn, the very spot where Miss Hunter had been compelled to sit. The curtain was drawn back now, and one could see across the drive to the distant fringe of trees.
Yes, yes, a fine old place, cried Rucastle. Copper Beeches has been in my family for generations. Solid as the oak that gird it, eh? And Miss Hunter, well, she has brought new life to our nursery, has she not, my dear?
Yes, she whispered faintly.
I thought Holmes's face grew sterner as he watched the poor lady's trembling hands, but he said nothing, sipping his wine in silence while Rucastle discoursed boisterously upon country matters. Good. At length, our host excused himself to attend to some business, and we rose to depart.
Watson, Holmes whispered as we passed into the hall, note the heavy bolts upon that side door, and the scratches upon the threshold. Something is kept or confined there.
I nodded, my heart quickening. Even in that brief passage, the whole house had seemed to exude secrecy and restraint.
Take care, gentlemen, Miss Hunter whispered as she escorted us to the gate. Rucastle grows suspicious easily. Tonight you will be in the grove?
Without fail, said Holmes firmly. Courage, Miss Hunter. The end is nearer than you think.
Thus we took our leave, and the heavy gate clanged behind us with a note that sounded to my ears like the closing of a prison door. As we walked back toward the inn, Holmes was silent for a while, his brows drawn in thought. At last he spoke.
The mask slips, Watson, but a little more, and the whole visage will be revealed. We have seen enough to know that treachery is here, and cruelty besides. Tonight shall decide the matter. If fortune favors us before another day dawns, the secret of the Copper Beeches will stand bare to the light of justice.
His words sent a shiver through me. Though the sun had now broken forth and gilded the fields with light, the quiet countryside seemed a strange setting for dark intrigue. Yet I knew too well, from past adventures, that crime and passion lurked as often beneath peaceful roofs as in the heart of the great city. And so we returned to our inn, our hearts resolved for the vigil that awaited us beneath the copper-hued trees. That night was one I shall not easily forget, Uplingebank said. The April air was cool but still, and a pale moon hung over the Hampshire fields, casting long shadows of the trees across the lane. Holmes and I had supped early at the inn, and as the hour of 9 approached, we set out toward the Copper Beeches, our footsteps muffled on the soft road. Holmes carried his stout ash stick, while I had armed myself with my old service revolver, at his suggestion.
We go as watchers, not as aggressors, Watson, Holmes said as we strode along. But it is well to be prepared, for a cornered villain may strike like a rat in a trap.
We reached the grove of Copper Beeches, whose great branches stretched overhead like the arches of a cathedral. Concealed among their trunks, we had a clear view of the front windows of the house. Already the lamps were lit within, and in the great drawing-room window, we saw a figure seated. Miss Violet Hunter, clad in the blue dress, her cropped hair gleaming in the lamplight. Poor girl, I muttered. She sits like a prisoner on display.
Yes, Watson, and yet, mark well, she is not herself, but another. Observe the silhouette. The posture clearly contrived to resemble some absent figure. The deception is meant for eyes such as ours, or rather, for that solitary watcher we expect.
Even as he spoke, a movement stirred at the far edge of the lawn. Among the shadows of the trees, a tall form emerged, a man, gaunt and haggard, who gazed with desperate intensity toward the window. He stretched out his hands as if in entreaty. My heart leapt, for the truth flashed upon me. Here was the one whom Miss Hunter had been made to represent. Holmes, there is our answer, I whispered.
Hush, Watson. Let us observe a moment longer.
The man took a step forward, then halted suddenly as the front door of the house opened, Covert Castle lantern in hand. His broad form outlined against the light, he strode across the lawn with surprising agility for one of his bulk, his eyes darting to left and right. At the same instant, a figure among the trees melted back into the shadows and was lost to sight.
Who's there? He bellowed, his voice echoing harshly in the still night. Come out, you rogue! Show yourself or I'll set the dog on you.
To say, he raised the lantern high, but no answer came. With an oath, he turned and strode back toward the house, slamming the door behind him. The man outside is the key, I whispered. But who is he, and why is he denied entrance?
We shall know soon enough. Tonight we must go further, Watson. Come.
To my astonishment, Holmes crept from our hiding place and stole across the lawn with the noiseless tread of a cat, followed, my heart pounding, and together we reached the shadow of the house. Holmes moved unerringly toward a side door, upon which I had earlier observed heavy bolts. He bent low, examining the threshold with his lantern shielded by his hand.
As I thought, he murmured. See these scratches, Watson. Made by claws. A dog has been chained here. One of size and ferocity, I should judge. We must proceed with caution.
We skirted the building, hugging the wall, until we came to a small window partly concealed by ivy. Holmes pressed his face close, then motioned me to look. Within was a narrow passage, and at the end of it, a stout door, its panels reinforced with iron.
The prison chamber, he whispered, and mark the light beneath the door. Someone is within.
Then we must force it, I breathed.
Music me. Not yet. Let us first try the simple means.
He produced from his pocket a small set of keys, those slender implements of steel which he had shown Egoism. We more than once in our adventures. Keep alas! With deft fingers he tried one after another until with a faint click the window yielded. In another moment we were inside the passage, the musty air close about us. We crept to the iron-bound door and Holmes placed his ear against it.
Listen, Watson. Do you hear?
I held my breath, and indeed I caught a faint sound like the sobbing of a woman, stifled and low. My blood ran cold.
We cannot delay, Holmes said firmly. Stand ready, revolver in hand.
He tried the handle. It was locked. Then, without further ceremony, he set his shoulder to the panel and pressed with all his mighty strength. The wood creaked but held. Again he flung himself upon it, and this time the lock burst with a snap. The door swung inward, and we rushed into the chamber. It was a small, bare room, lit by a single lamp. On a bed in the corner sat a young woman, her face hidden in her hands, her hair of chestnut hue cut short as though by force. She looked up with a cry as we entered, and I started in astonishment, for she was the very image of Miss Violet Hunter.
Who are you? Oh, for pity's sake, do not harm me, she cried.
Fear nothing, madam, said Holmes gently. We are friends. Tell me, are you Miss Alice Rucastle?
Yes, yes, I am, she sobbed. But my father, he will kill me if he finds you here.
Goodies. Before Holmes could reply, there came a furious shout from the passage, and the thud of heavy feet. The door was flung wide, and Geoffrey Rucastle burst in, his face purple with rage.
You scoundrels, he roared. Thieves, intruders in my house. By heaven, I'll make you pay.
He raised a heavy stick, but Holmes stepped calmly between him and the cowering girl.
Enough, Rucastle, he said coldly. Your villainy is exposed. We know that you kept your daughter prisoner here while forcing another to impersonate her. The law shall deal with you.
Lies, malicious lies, he bellowed. She is mad, I tell you, mad as a March hare. I keep her here for her own safety.
Mad? And yet, so precisely does she resemble your governess that you must clip her hair and compel another to play her part at the window? No, sir. The only madness here is your own cruelty. Stand aside, or by heaven you shall find the odds against you.
At that instant there came a deep growl from without, and through the broken door burst a huge hound, its eyes gleaming, its fangs bared. It hurled itself at Holmes, but with a spring he avoided the rush. I fired my revolver, the report echoing through the house, and the beast fell with a snarl at our feet.
My dog. My beautiful Carlo, cried Rucastle in frenzy, dropping his stick and kneeling beside the animal. You've murdered him.
Better the dog than the daughter, said Holmes sternly. Watson, see to the young lady. Miss Rucastle, you are free now. No man shall lay hands upon you again.
He's out. The girl clung to me, trembling, while Rucastle raged and cursed over the fallen brute. At that moment, the pale figure of Mrs. Rucastle appeared, drawn by the noise. She gave one look at the scene and flung herself upon her knees beside the young woman, clasping her in her arms.
Alice, my poor child, she sobbed. Forgive me. I was powerless to aid you.
Mother, the girl cried, and the two wept in each other's arms.
Holmes, with a gesture of his hand, beckoned me away from the touching scene.
Come, Watson, he said. Our work here is nearly done. The law must settle the rest. But justice, in a measure, has already been achieved.
And so we left the Copper Beeches, the moonlight glimmering upon its somber walls. Behind us echoed the sobs of the reunited mother and daughter, mingled with the curses of a man whose wickedness had brought his own downfall. We quitted the Copper Beeches in the stillness of the midnight hour, Holmes and I walking silently side by side along the country lane. Behind us, the house loomed dark and heavy, while the grove of ruddy beeches swayed gently in the night air. My mind was crowded with tumultuous impressions. The pale face of Alice Rucastle, the frenzy of her father, the faithful courage of Violet Hunter. Above all, the swift and decisive manner in which Holmes had pierced the veil of deception filled me with renewed admiration. Holmes, I said at last, breaking the silence. Once again, you have torn the mask from a villain and restored freedom to the oppressed. Yet I confess my mind still gropes in some darkness. Will you not set forth the whole chain of reasoning by which you arrived at the truth?
Willingly, my dear Watson, Holmes replied, his tone calm as ever, though his eyes gleamed with inward satisfaction. The case, though dramatic in its unfolding, was built upon very simple foundations. From the first, the conditions imposed upon Miss Hunter were so eccentric as to demand explanation. Why the blue dress? Why the cutting of her hair? Why the enforced posture at the window? Each pointed inevitably to impersonation.
Yes, I perceived that when you hinted it, I said, but for whose sake was the impersonation contrived?
That, Watson, was the crux. A wealthy salary for trivial duties could only mean that the service rendered was not that of a governess, but of a decoy. The resemblance between Miss Hunter and some other person in the household was therefore certain. When we saw Miss Hunter's figure in the window and the watcher among the trees, the matter declared itself. The man outside was the one to whom the sight was directed. He must be connected with the family, and who more likely than the daughter herself?
And the locked wing, the sobbing at night, these confirmed it.
Precisely. The daughter, Alice Rucastle, had been kept prisoner, that her father might control her fortune or prevent her union with one of whom he disapproved. When she resisted, he resorted to cruel confinement. But to quiet suspicion among friends, or perhaps to mislead her lover if he sought her out, he employed our brave Miss Hunter to impersonate her at the window. Thus, the absent one was seemingly present, and inquiries might be diverted.
As Holmes spoke, the whole dark scheme grew plain before me. I could see the wretched Alice immured within her chamber, while her likeness was played by another to deceive the eyes of her suitor, lingering desperately outside. Your surmise about the chained dog was no less accurate, I remarked.
Ah, yes, Carlo. He was their final safeguard, set to deter intrusion upon that side passage. Yet, in his very ferocity lay our deliverance. For when the beast fell, Rucastle's power fell with him. Without his fangs to guard the secret, the prison door stood open. Oh!
We walked on in silence for a time, the lane stretching white before us beneath the moon. Suddenly I said, what of Miss Hunter? She has borne herself with a courage most rare. What future awaits her, think you?
Miss Hunter, Holmes answered gravely, is one of those women who ennoble their sex by quiet bravery. I have seldom met a character more resolute or more steadfast. She will, I believe, find happiness in her profession, perhaps even establish a school of her own, where her independence and strength may flourish. Such a woman does not lack for a future.
His words proved true, as I learned later. Violet Hunter, with the capital she had prudently saved, did in time open a school at Walsall, where she achieved both prosperity and respect. I often recall her bright courage when I think of the perils women must endure in their solitary employments. The next day, after due communication with the local authorities, the matter of Geoffrey Rucastle was placed in their hands. Sabah! He, the unhappy man, thwarted and disarmed, sank into a state of collapse from which he never wholly recovered. His wife, released from fear, devoted herself to her daughter, and thus some measure of peace was restored within those somber walls. And yet, Holmes, I said, as we prepared to return to London, one thing puzzles me still. And what of the lover who watched from the trees? What part did he play?
Ah, Watson, you touch the heart of the matter, Holmes replied, his voice softer than usual. That man was Mr. Fowler, a gentleman of honourable intentions who had sought Alice's hand. Rucastle, greedy of her fortune and unwilling to surrender his authority, contrived her imprisonment to prevent the match. Fowler, faithful and persevering, haunted the place, hoping for some sign of her. It was to him that the false Alice was displayed. Thus the cruel deception was aimed at breaking his hope. Happily, it failed. With Alice's release, the two were reunited, and I trust they will find the happiness so long denied them.
Topic Dowd. Then indeed justice has been done, I said warmly.
Justice, yes, Holmes mused, though often in this world justice comes limping and mercy follows far behind. Let us be content that in this case, at least, suffering has been relieved and love vindicated. The Copper Beeches will stand long in memory, not for the house itself, but for the shadows it concealed. Well, aye.
Thus ended our adventure among the beaches of Hampshire. As we sat once more in our familiar sitting room in Baker Street, I reflected upon the strange contrasts of human life, that beneath the peaceful surface of an English country house should lurk cruelty, deceit, and greed, and that out of such darkness should emerge courage, devotion, and love. And I thought to myself, as often before, that it was my privilege beyond measure to walk beside Sherlock Holmes, whose keen mind could pierce the veil of crime and bring light to the hidden corners of the human heart.
Another case for your chronicles, Watson, Holmes said, as he stretched himself languidly upon the sofa. But do not make me too infallible. The public must see the detective as a man, not as a miracle.
As a man, Holmes, I laughed. There never was man's reason more miraculous. And so, while London's hum rose once more outside our window, quays, a venture of the Copper Beeches was laid to rest. Yet even now, when the spring winds stir the branches of country lanes, I see again in memory those dark trees, that lonely house, and the brave young woman who sought our aid.